Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel. This is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. And today, my guest is Dr. Joe Caprini. And Dr. Caprini, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll get into a little of your background, but first, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to have this chat with me.
It's a real pleasure, Marcus.
So, Dr. Caprini, we've been emailing for a couple of years, but tell me again how we first met.
I was at a medical conference, and as a part of the conference, you were the invited speaker.
Do you
And
remember which conference that was?
I really don't know if it was at a meeting of the American Venous Forum or at a meeting of the International Society of Hemostasis and Thrombosis.
Okay. Those names aren't ringing a bell, but either way, thank you for remembering me from that conference.
Yeah, well, it's something I'll never forget because it was a life-changing experience. I've been a thrombosis, which you would say a specialist, and so many times people naturally would consult with me to ask about my helping them with why they got a blood clot and how they could prevent another one, and things like that. And there would be certain times in my 43 years that I would have to tell patients that they weren't going to get better and that I couldn't help them get better and that they were going to have to deal with what they had the best way that they could. And when you related your story of how when you were blind, last thing you remember were those white lights, and then after that was a world of pain and darkness. And these two world experts were brought in to try to save your sight, and they couldn't. And they came back to you afterwards, trying to apologize and tell you that they had done the best thing that they possibly could. You lashed out at them. How could you pose as being the world expert? You couldn't even help me. And that was just like a bombshell. I had heard that many, many times in my practice. And I was always frustrated by that and frustrated by those remarks. But when you explained to me how you later turned that around, and by getting all of that hatred and anger out of your heart and turning it around to love and compassion, it changed your life. And that also helped me a great deal in my practice. And I think was one of those things that helped me to change my life. And at the time, this was before March 1st, 2011. I know that. And so I was to have a terrible accident. And at the time, you helped me prepare for how I was going to deal with this accident. I don't know if you want me to get into that now or.
Well, I tell you what, I want to come to those stories because you and I could talk literally all day.
Yes.
I feel like we have such common heart stories, and but let me take it back a little bit because this is one of the questions that I ask all of my pre-meds every semester, just when I'm getting to know them. You wanted to go into medicine, and you became a cardiologist, very world famous cardiologist for the Caprini scale. I want to ask you how it feels to have something named after you like that. But to start at the beginning, where did you did you come from a family of medical professionals, or did you have healthcare professionals in your family? What got you interested in taking your life in this direction?
That's a very good question. My father had two sisters, and one of his sisters, when she was a year and a half, fell and she had a cerebral hemorrhage and became totally irrational and was
traumatic brain injury.
traumatic brain injury, and her mother My grandmother would not put her in a home. This was in the early 1900s. And she kept her at home for 76 years and took care of her. And one of the side effects of that was that there was no social life in the family. And uh, my father's other sister, Amelia, and I somehow think it had something to do with this. Uh, she became the second woman graduate of the University of Pittsburgh Medical School in 1927. And previous to this, my grandparents were well-to-do, and they had a big liquor business with a specialty liquor store in Pittsburgh at the Point, uh, where the Monongahela and the Allegheny Rivers met to join the Ohio, famous place. But then Prohibition came along and wiped them out, and they became from being very, very well-to-do to sort of destitute. Despite that, my aunt, Amelia, actually taught anatomy in order to get through medical school. And you can imagine teaching gross anatomy in those days as a woman. And anyway, she became a physician and was a very decorated physician for 70 years. And she was a great inspiration to me. And also, my father. The other part of the story is that I had a sister, Patricia, who, when she was 11, uh, underwent a mastoid operation and died on the table. And that really destroyed my parents. My father had a big job with the Liquor Control Board in Pennsylvania, which he lost afterwards, became very depressed. And it took several years before I was conceived and born. But all of this sort of spurred me on to want to continue in my aunt's footsteps. And I would
So
say,
let me ask you about that. You say that you lost an older sister when she was 11. Did your parents have other children besides you two?
no, and I wasn't born yet. And as a
Right,
matter of
right.
fact, according to my daughter, who the ladies know all this stuff, they said it was a Herculean effort to have you conceived because your parents were so depressed, but they were determined to have another child. And so the thing is, I'd like to carry that step forward because that shows the why we don't understand the will of the Creator. Because I've gone on to have this very, very successful career. None of it would have happened if my sister hadn't died.
Right, right.
And that's wow, very compelling. And you you say, how does it feel to have something named after you? There was a bunch, there were a whole lot of people that created this. Is a world famous risk assessment, but it's due to a lot of people, a lot of them smarter than I am, that helped me. And I think it was all guided by the Holy Spirit because I was a very average student. I was nothing special. And but yet I was put in the right place. The people were put around me to help me. So I don't think of this as mine. I think of this as an effort that was pushed by the Holy Spirit and a whole team of people, doctors, nurses, PhDs, that helped put this together. So it's not about me. It's about the
Yeah,
mission. It's all about the
right,
mission.
right. Right. And your mission for years has been helping patients every step of the way through their cardiovascular difficulties. How did you first, I guess, learn compassion, how to deliver compassionate communication in a clinical setting? Who were some of your mentors or I guess professors, teachers, et cetera, that helped you better understand the human side of medicine?
Well, first of all, I'm a vascular surgeon, not cardiologist. But
Oh, I'm
anyway,
so
no,
sorry.
no,
I
no, that's
apologize
fine.
for that. Thank you.
But uh, the answer to that question is Stella Mary Evans, my dear wife of. We're married 57 and a half years, and we've been together 60 years. And she taught me, her father was an alcoholic. And through all of the troubles they had as children, her and her mother, my mother-in-law, who I love dearly, and her grandmother, who I also love dearly, had such compassion and love for the alcoholic father, because he was a wonderful man, but he had this illness. And they really were the ones that taught me compassion, how they could put themselves in the other person's shoe. And it's just unbelievable, a very powerful force.
And that wasn't taught to you by clinicians.
No,
That was family.
no, family. Family.
Family.
Watching
Wow.
that family in operation was a joy to behold.
That's a beautiful
How many
testament.
people love their
Yeah.
mother-in-laws? I love my
Yeah.
mother-in-law, I can't tell you. And the grandmother. They
Mhm.
were just absolutely adorable. And I have this beautiful picture. Uh, I have two beautiful pictures of this family. One is my Polish grandmother, of course, came over from Poland and scrubbed toilets and so forth just to get established. And she's standing next to Stella, when Stella graduated from high school, and she's standing there so proud, and it was such a wonderful thing. And the other thing was a picture I have of Stella at her graduation from high school, and an inscription by her mother said, "Love to my daughter, sweet in every way and kind to everyone she meets." And
Mhm.
it was just a wonderful, it embodied the whole spirit. And so I've been sort of uh, learned about this and been in admiration of this to this day.
That's incredibly special, and I would raise my hand too. How many people love their mother-in-law? I do. I've
Yeah.
got a great mother-in-law too that that I love dearly, and my wife often says that she hit the in-law lottery with my mom and dad.
Well, there
So
you go.
yeah, I know a lot of people say, "Oh, everybody ends up messing up your kids," or that's just the nature of things. But I know that when you talked earlier about the people that were put in your path to help you succeed and help you help others, I very much feel that same way. That the not just my parents, but not just my family, but my community, my home church, et cetera, et cetera. We need those other relationships with human beings.
It just makes you
So
feel so good.
yeah, it's well, we're just being our most human then,
Right.
right? Yeah. So that takes us, back to the kind of the early days of you getting together with your wife, and I know that there was med school in there, and you served in the military during pretty tumultuous time in American history as
Right.
well.
Right.
What kind of lessons about compassion and courage did you take away from your time in the military?
Well, the military was a fascinating and life changing experience. Now, I was in the Bury plan, so that meant that I was allowed to graduate medical school before getting drafted. But then after that, they could draft you. And of course, in 1967, with the Tet Offensive and so forth, I was drafted. And I had done a year of medicine and then a year of surgery. And so I was a partially trained surgeon. And when I was recruited, I was sent to Malmstrom Air Force Base to the 854th Medical Group, Great Falls, Montana. And initially, I was a little bit upset because I wanted to go to Vietnam and try use my surgical skills to help the, the, the soldiers. And but something fascinating happened there. Since I was the junior surgeon, the senior surgeon, Dr. Earl Sweet, a fantastic surgeon from Massachusetts General Hospital, uh, one of those really beautiful, gifted people, said, "Joe," he said, we were at a 40-bed hospital with dependents because they served the 200 missile sites in Montana. Uh, and so it was a big hospital, really, in the middle of nowhere, really. Uh, but Great Falls was the biggest city in 5 states. Anyway, he said, "I want you're going to do the tonsils." And I said, "Oh my God." And so he said, nothing to it. And so we did a few tonsils together. And I said, I'm really afraid. I said to myself, I'm really afraid that I'm going to operate on some bleeding child, some child they're going to bleed. Maybe happened what happened to my sister. And so I self-studied blood coagulation. And I had the Cormans do some of the blood tests, coagulation tests to the children that we're going to have. I was going to operate on, and in about 150 children that I did in the 2-year period, I think 11 or 12% of them had abnormal blood tests, so I never touched them. And there was an air vac once a week, went down to Fitzsimmons General Hospital. So they went down there and they learned from they made the diagnosis of what was going on with the kids. Most of the time it was nothing serious, but, I didn't understand hematology. So when I came back to the hospital, I had to do 6 months of research, and I chose to do bleeding patients. And I did the same tests to bleeding patients when I was on my research 6 months. Only now there was no Corman. I did the tests, and I had Stephen Curtides, a famous hematologist, a very loving man, compassionate. I've learned compassion from a lot of those people. Helped me, and I was able to save. There were 53 or 54 patients. They were all acutely bleeding, and I was able to stop the bleeding by doing blood tests and giving them blood products, so they avoided surgery, and it was revolutionary at the time. How did I figure that out? I have no idea. I was inspired. And so after that, everybody in the hospital wanted to have Caprini when they had a bleeding problem. So we set up a laboratory in the Department of Surgery, and during the next 25 years, we studied 100,000 patients with bleeding disorders. And I had some very brilliant people that helped me with this. But anyway, now I understand in retrospect. I was angry and upset because I didn't go to Vietnam, but the divine had another plan for me that was much greater. And as a dear friend of me said many years later, I also practiced general and vascular surgery for many years. He said, Joe, you're an adequate surgeon. You're good. You're fine, but you're much better at the blood clots. Stick with the blood clots, which I eventually did. And, the whole story and the Caprini score and everything all grew out of that with a lot of very, very, very brilliant people. And just to give you an example that I'm not just changing social insincerities and trying to underplay this thing, is that I came up, it was a total accident that I came up with this I was involved with compression early on in the Squeezy Boots, which also the Squeezy Boots you use in surgery. I was the first one to do them in general surgery. And we were looking for changes in the blood, and we never found that. But then I was invited to the first NIH conference to talk about the advantages of using the Squeezy Boots, and the Kendall Company was there. And I told the Kendall Company, you need to do a big grant to show the value of these Squeezy Boots. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. It could cost $1 million. And besides that, it would cut into our stocking business. And we don't want to do that. But I'll tell you what, Dr. Caprini, why don't you develop a list of risk factors and that could cause a blood clot? And so this was suggested to me by the nurses and the PhD and the administrators of Kendall. And so I did that and came back and started using that risk score. And I was sitting one day looking at, I had the good fortune to have Professor Laxman Sehgal, who was the inventor of one of the artificial bloods. And he I don't know how this happened, but he came to work in my lab. We were doing all these patients, and he was sitting opposite me one day, and he said, Joe, you keep referring to your Caprini score. And he said, what you don't realize is it's not just a list of risk factors, but each risk factor has a different power. And it's the number of risk factors plus their power that gives the score. And that was like an aha moment. That had never dawned on me. And to this day, that's the secret of this. If you take a risk factor like bed rest, it's a low power to cause a blood clot. But if you have cancer of the pancreas, that's a high power. So cancer got more points than bed rest. And so when you take the number of factors plus their power, you get a score, and it works. And it's not Caprini, it's the nature of things.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
anyway, it's a very interesting story how all of this happened.
Well, so can we go back to the Squeezy Boots? You say
Yes.
you were in on the first research with that, correct?
Yeah. That's So another thing is, why did I ever do this? There was a Professor Hartert in 1948 in Germany that came up with this thromboelastograph, and it was a machine that had a cup, and the cup rotated, and you put a piston in if you filled the cup with a little bit of blood, and you put this piston in it, and as the blood started to clot, it would start to move the piston, and that was connected to a wire, which was connected to a graph, so that you got the onset of blood coagulation, the rate of blood clot formation, and the strength of the blood clot. And none of this can be measured with regular tests. Now, why did I get interested in that? I have no clue. But Kendall found out about it, and they had these devices. Ed Arkins, uh, with Andrew Nicolaides in England, developed these Squeezy Boots. And they noticed one of the things about the Squeezy Boots was, did it stimulate the blood clotting system so that would be not only forcing blood out of the leg, but activating the blood clot dissolving system so that it resisted blood clots. And so they wanted me to test this in the thromboelastograph. And we spent years working on this, and we could never really show those changes. But in the course of that, I started testing those boots in patients. And we found that by using those boots compared to the standard at the time, which was stockings, that we could prevent a lot of blood clots. So that's how I got started with all of that. I mean,
Well,
it's incredible.
I wore some of those for a good long while,
Yes, of course you
while I
did. Of
was
course you did.
hospitalized,
Yeah.
and not just in surgery. I remember those
Yeah.
consciously too,
Right.
laying in a room. So, thank you for your work on that. I guess you had some part in helping to save my life, or at least prevent blood clots during that time.
Why? I mean, this is all so complexly orchestrated
Mm,
and so impossible to envision or to plan out that it had to be guided by the higher power.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just so obvious to me. That's why, and I don't want to. I'm very careful about this. I'll discuss this freely with you because you and I we're of the same mind. But yeah, the power, the higher power, has been so incredibly a part of my life right up to today, uh, that it's just it's something that's just there. And the only reason I'd like to talk about it is to have other people learn about the joy of turning yourself over to the higher power like a little child, and just following your instincts, and following and just trying to, we have a Cardinal Supich, Blaze Supich in Chicago, and I'm very fond of watching his mass on Sundays. And one of the things he said was, at one of these masses, which I thought was very impactful. He said, I got a paperweight for Christmas. And this was in conjunction with his sermon of the day. And he said, the paperweight said on it, just love everyone. I'll sort the rest out later. Signed, God. And he
Mhm.
said, what that really means is just love everybody and don't pass judgment on anyone, and leave that to the higher power. And if you just do that, you'll achieve such goodness and happiness. And so, my friends, I have this little poker group of retired doctors, and we play for quarters from time to time. So I tried to talk to them about it, and they snapped back at me and said, "Oh, that means you loved Hitler." And I didn't know what to say. But then afterwards, I thought about it, and I said, no, no, no. Of course, everyone hates everything, all those bad things and those terrible things that were done by all those people. However, we hate what they did, but we are in no position to pass judgment on them and why they did it and what the overall plan is. Because it may be that although, just like my sister's death created 50 years of heartbreak for my mother, which I've never overcome, there was a purpose for that. So uh, look at that. Now, one more thing from the Cardinal, which I thought was very impactful. When the Roe versus Wade was reversed, he said, "Well, those of us in Catholicism are very happy because this agrees with our principles of being pro-life." He said, "But I want you all to remember, be respectful of the other side. Don't judge just because they're not doing what you think is right. You're in no position to judge them. It's fine that you're pro-life, but leave it to the Creator to decide about the other side and have compassion for them because they feel as strongly about their side as you do about your side." Very impactful.
We use a couple of different definitions for compassion, and the one that I like the most, just because it's 3 words long, I'm not even sure it's really 3 words, maybe two, is non-judgmental awareness.
I love it.
Non-judgmental awareness equals compassion.
Yes.
And it's very, very difficult to not judge. Very difficult to not judge. If we sit for just a couple of moments, we'll start judging,
Yes.
right? Oh,
Yes.
my hip feels tight, or I'm thirsty, or something smells in here, or this chair's not comfortable, or something like that. We just immediately start judging. And
Yeah.
if we take some time to consciously and intentionally try to not judge, at least for me, that's when those moments of being guided by something higher seem to come into my life. And it sounds like that same way with you.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I want to add here something because uh, although I've been raised as a Catholic and so on and so forth, there's nothing to do with religion. And I would use the example of the American Indians. The American Indians had a fabulous relationship with the Creator. They revered everything the Creator made: the rain, the sun, the buffalo. All of their they paid homage to all of the creations of the Creator. So they were just one step removed. And I think that's the really important thing. And it's important for all of us to remember. This goes beyond. I don't want you to join my religious club, or
Mhm.
you're not going to be saved. I want you to believe in a higher power, and the fact that the higher power can help you to help your fellow man and woman, of course. And if you say that you love the higher power, that means you love all of the other human beings, because we're all brothers and sisters, for God's sake. Give me a
Yeah.
break.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been working for Notre Dame for several years just as an adjunct. The first year that I was there, the women's basketball team won the big game,
Yeah.
the Final Four tournament. And I at that time chose to take on the moniker that because it was my first year, I was now Notre Dame's German Protestant good luck charm. And so, and even that may
Right.
not necessarily be completely accurate, because these days my practice is looks more Buddhist than anything. I spend a couple hours a day trying to focus on my breath and meditate and not judge. And
Of course.
again, it's hard. It's
Of
hard
course.
not to judge.
That's a full-time job. No
It's a
question
full
about
time
it.
job.
No
That's
question.
right.
But it's worth it.
Well, Dr. Caprini, in the time we have left, can I throw just a couple of random questions your way?
Sure.
All right. So let's say you were stranded on the proverbial desert island, and yet it's a well appointed desert island. And so you get to keep one piece of art with you. And whether this is a book or a piece of visual art, or uh, any type of art you can think of, a photograph, what, or another way to ask this question is, what is a piece of art that speaks to you?
So, would this include music?
Sure, absolutely.
Mozart.
Mozart. Okay.
What he did in 36 years, over 500 Kirka listings, is unbelievable. And it covers everything. It covers the joy, all kinds of things. But one of the things that would keep me going is listening to Mozart.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Let's say that you happen to open up your wallet or your PayPal account or whatever you use to have money, and you found a $100 bill had magically appeared in your account or in your wallet, and you have to spend it today, and you have to spend it on someone else. What do you buy and for whom?
I would put it in the collection at church.
There you go. Spoken like a man with a generous heart right there.
Hey,
And the last question for you then is, if you had the highest billboard on the tallest mountain in the world, what is your message to humanity?
just love everyone. I'll sort the rest out later. Signed,
Sign
God.
God. That's wonderful. Dr. Caprini, thank you so much for sharing your insights with me today. I'm so glad we had the chance to have this conversation. I look forward to future conversations.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor. I revere the day I met you, and I admire you for what you're doing. And I've tried to do in my little way what you are doing.
Doing it in a big way. You're saving people's lives every day, and I have people like you to thank for the life that I have, and thank you again for being with me today.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel, and thank you to everyone who continues to subscribe and like and review and rate and do all those fun social media interaction things. Very much appreciate you. Thank you all again.